Picture this, 74,000 years ago, something happened that almost wiped humanity completely off the map. And I'm not talking about a war or some ancient plague. It was a volcano. And the wild part? The proof of this ancient cataclysm is literally hiding right inside your cells today. Every single person alive on Earth shares DNA that traces back to an incredibly tiny, fragile group of survivors. People who somehow managed to cling to existence through the darkest, coldest years in the entire history of Homo sapiens.
So this isn't just geological history, right? This is honestly the ultimate survival thriller. I mean, when the sky went pitch black, global temperatures totally plummeted, and entire food webs just collapsed, how did our ancestors actually survive their darkest hour? To really wrap our heads around the miracle of our survival, we've got to flash back 74,000 years and set the stage. Act 1, the eve of destruction.
Okay, so 74,000 years ago, our world looked incredibly different. For starters, we weren't alone. Imagine this vast, sweeping landscape where multiple different human lineages are actually coexisting and competing. You've got the robust Neanderthals dominating Ice Age Europe and Western Asia. Out in the Far East, the Denisovans are roaming around. Down on the islands of Southeast Asia, you have the diminutive hobbits, Homo floresiensis, totally adapted to island life. And then, over in Africa, anatomically modern Homo sapiens are developing. It was this complex, deeply competitive drama, and honestly, the outcome of which group would ultimately inherit the Earth was completely up in the air. But then, on the island of Sumatra, this script flipped.
Act 2, the Toba Cataclysm.
To even begin to grasp the sheer, terrifying scale of what happened next, we really need a point of comparison. Let's look at 1815, when the Tambora volcano erupted. It ejected about 160 cubic kilometers of ash. That dropped global temperatures, caused widespread famine, and triggered the infamous Year Without a Summer, which, fun fact, is what famously trapped Mary Shelley indoors and prompted her to write Frankenstein. Now, let's look at Toba. Toba blasted an unbelievable 2,800 cubic kilometers of ash into the stratosphere. That is 10,000 times larger than the greatest eruption in recorded human history. It's almost hard to fathom. Now, the immediate blast was obviously devastating, but the secondary effects? Absolutely apocalyptic. Toba unleashed this cascading volcanic winter. We're talking a sudden, brutal global temperature drop of 8 to 17 degrees Celsius. On top of that, a thick veil of sulfuric acid droplets essentially blocked out the sun for 3 to 6 years. The global monsoon rainfall systems were just totally disrupted, leading to massive, sweeping droughts. Plant life withered away, and those large herbivores that our ancestors completely relied on for food, they simply vanished. But here's the thing. For our ancestors hanging on in Africa, thousands of miles away from Sumatra, this didn't look like a giant wall of fire. It was more like a creeping, invisible ghost. Microscopic glass shards, which scientists call cryptotephra, just started settling invisibly over the African continent. Try to imagine standing out on the savannah, looking up at a sky that just grows steadily paler and colder, day after day. The sun just loses its warmth. The rains stop coming. Everything around you is inexplicably deteriorating. It was a slow, strange, and deeply isolating horror. Which brings us to how we actually know all this today, the microscopic proof of this macro disaster.
Act 3, the genetic bottleneck.
Let's shift gears for a second, moving from massive global climate models directly into your cells. How do we actually know things got this bad? Well, scientists can read the genetic memory encoded right inside us. By sequencing modern mitochondrial DNA, which passes basically unchanged from mother to child, and Y chromosome DNA passed from father to son, researchers can literally trace random mutations backward in time. But here is the crazy part. Instead of finding a deep, wildly diverse family tree, they found these incredibly shallow branches that all clustered together right around the exact time of the Toba eruption. And the math? It led them to a startling, frankly terrifying number, 3,000 to 5,000. That is the estimated number of effective breeding individuals of Homo sapiens left on the entire planet during the absolute lowest point of this bottleneck. Think about that for a second. That is fewer people than you'd find in a typical small town. That tiny, tiny group represented the total reproductive potential of our entire species. To put into perspective just how close we actually came to the edge, consider this. If you go sequence the DNA of a single chimpanzee troop living today in the Kibale forest in Uganda, you will find more genetic diversity in that one local troop than you will find across all 8 billion modern Homo sapiens alive right now. We are this massively globally distributed species, Yet we are incredibly genetically homogenized. Why? Because we were practically forced through the eye of a needle 74,000 years ago. So, the big question, who were they, and how on earth did they make it? Act 4, the coastal refuge. Let's zoom all the way in on those few thousand individuals who somehow kept our lineage going. Just picture it. Around 40 people shivering on a rocky promontory at places like Border Cave or Pinnacle Point down in South Africa. Wood is incredibly scarce, so they're huddled around this tiny flickering fire. The ocean breeze is absolutely freezing, and the sky above is just this pale milky gray. They are surrounded by a landscape completely stripped of the large game they used to hunt. They are entirely alone, separated from other surviving groups by hundreds and hundreds of miles. Their survival required a massive pivot. Because the terrestrial food webs had totally collapsed, they turned to the ocean. The ocean, thankfully, it was buffered against that severe atmospheric cooling by its sheer thermal mass. So they started exploiting intertidal shellfish, things like mussels and limpets. These didn't migrate away, and pretty much anyone in the group could gather them. But to actually do this successfully, they had to develop a really complex knowledge of lunar tidal cycles, just to know exactly when those intertidal rock platforms would be exposed safely. And this intense environmental stress, it essentially acted as an evolutionary crucible. They weren't just scraping by, they were innovating rapidly. In fact, the archaeological record shows this incredible burst of behavioral modernity right around this time. They started creating sophisticated microlithic stone tools, these small geometric blades hafted onto handles. We also see this huge surge in the use of red ochre, which was almost certainly used for social signaling and body art, probably to identify allies in a world where resources were critically low. They literally developed complex communication and exchange networks just to survive. This crucible of survival really forged the path forward. Think about the timeline here. 300,000 years ago, Neanderthals are dominating Eurasia. 74,000 years ago, Toba nearly erases us completely. But then, by 70,000 years ago, that desperate coastal survival had driven explosive behavioral innovation. Armed with these brand new technological and social tools, and entering a Eurasian landscape where Neanderthal populations had also been battered by the volcanic winter, Homo sapiens were primed. We were able to rapidly expand out of Africa around 60,000 years ago, eventually colonizing the entire globe. Which brings us to what all of this means for us today. Because honestly, the geological forces that almost erased us, they aren't just history. They are very much still active.
Act 5, Made of Survival.
The Toba magmatic system is actually still alive beneath Sumatra right now. And of course, there are other supervolcanoes around the world. And look, while the probability of an eruption in our lifetimes is extremely low, our modern vulnerability is pretty stark. If a Toba-scale event were to happen today, it would strike a world of 8 billion people who are entirely dependent on a highly synchronized agricultural system. Our global food system right now operates with only about 60 to 90 days of stored grain reserves. We would be completely unable to buffer a disruption of our agricultural seasons that lasted 3 to 6 years. Those ancient survivors adapted because they were flexible foragers. Our modern civilization, on the other hand, is dangerously rigid. Ultimately, the absolute greatest takeaway from this explainer is hidden right inside you. You are the molecular trace of a shared catastrophe. You can stand anywhere on Earth, look at the people around you, and know that you are deeply, fundamentally connected to them. Your genome carries the scars of that brutal bottleneck, sure, but it also carries the incredible resilience of those ancient people shivering by a fire in South Africa. You are, quite literally, made of survival. Our ancestors didn't have early warning systems, they didn't have climate models, and they definitely didn't have historical knowledge. They survived purely on adaptability and grit. Today, thanks to the cognitive tools that very stress forged in them, we can look back 74,000 years, actually understand what happened, and even map the active magma chambers beneath our feet. We survived our darkest hour by chance and by brilliant adaptation. But looking forward, we really have to ask ourselves, are we going to use the knowledge they gave us to properly prepare for a geological future?